So I'm Sunando. Uh, I guess I'm an illustrator and a designer. I was part of the very early batches of a school called Srishti in Bangalore. Back when it wasn't really a school, it was just some 50 kids running wild without any courses or
We're
anything.
still running wild.
I'm sure. So I didn't really specialize in anything. I ended up doing bits and pieces of lots of things, and that's kind of what I'm still doing in a sense. So I have like my fingers in a lot of different projects. I draw comics. This is something I think it kind of ended up being this way because when I was growing, when I was a kid, I was in school. I think I was 8 or 9 at the time. I still didn't know how to read. Possibly I had a learning disability, but back in the 80s, these weren't things people were really talking about. In a sense, I couldn't read. People in school were concerned. They were like, we can't keep promoting him unless he figures this out. Which is when my mother kind of had this idea, which I guess she kind of regrets in some ways now, where she was like, oh, maybe he'll respond to pictures. So they started buying me comics, and I actually figured out how to read from that. So it was always a thing. I went to college. Again, you skip ahead. I graduated in 2006. I was still drawing comics. I was part of this, I guess, class of people from NID, Srishti, some other schools that was put together by a publisher called Manta Ray, if anyone's heard of them. So Manta Ray was curating these things for Mint, and it was out I think it was primarily a web thing called Small Picture, where I was living in Delhi at the time. It was about social issues in Delhi, sometimes around the world, things like that. It was a pretty cool group of people to work with. We were at that weird cusp where web comics weren't a thing but were becoming a thing. A lot of us kind of got to get in there and build from that point. I started doing things. This was something I did for Amar Chitra Katha, of all places. It's an adaptation of an H.P. Lovecraft story. No, they're these very weird, very kinky horror stories. Definitely not suited for children, but I tried to kind of like be subversive, get it in. It got me blacklisted from Amar Chitra Katha for many years because they did print it. Around this time I was working I worked on the Khalsa project. I worked with Rajiv Sethi on the Bombay Airport project, a whole bunch of things. And I kind of stopped drawing comics for a bit, but I would do stuff for my social media feeds, mostly fan art, mostly illustration of things I was reading, watching. So I was kind of still out there, but not really doing a lot of commercial comics or illustration work. But it did feed into my other work where, for something like the Khalsa project, where there were basically no artifacts to work with. So you had to go back, read books, come up with illustrative ways to tell these stories. And so this is just like a panel by panel thing where you have the references to the side, my concept drawing, my final drawing. And then you had something like this, which was the final installation that went to the museum. So I did this for about a year and a half, moved to Anandpur Sahib. It was an experience. Yeah, but it's nice to actually know that your work exists in 3 dimensions somewhere and will probably be there for a while. Over the years, the small picture also morphed into something called the big picture because the editorial team changed hands. They were not doing it as regularly, and they also switched to an app-based format. So then they started sending us things like this, saying this is one. So it has to be comics that you can read on your phone or your device and things like that. So one big thing they were doing was when the movie Kabali came out last year, they sort of had a promotional tie-up, and they said, we should do something which is reportage on these Malaysian street gangs. So an editor from the Mint called me and he said, we're working with this scriptwriter from film and these CAs and things, and they have stories. Would you like to draw it? I said, sure. It had been a few years since I'd drawn a comic. I thought, okay, this could be fun. This could be a way to get back into it. I wasn't very thrilled with the design brief at first because what they said was, so we really love Sin City. Everyone's familiar with Sin City, the comics and movies. So can you do it like that? So I was like, you're doing a digital thing. As a designer, I feel I should tell you should be in color. You should work around that. So I said, let me work on a couple of concept drawings, and then let's see where it goes. So this was the first couple of illustrations I did for that, which they were actually really happy with. So I ended up drawing maybe 30 out of 60 frames, but I wasn't really feeling it at that point. So I then tried to distract myself, come up with like typography and things, just to see if I could make it work for myself. Okay, so somewhere along this time, like I said, I wasn't really getting it. I was like, why am I drawing it like this? And then someone else read the script, one of my friends, and he said, this is like Narcos, the TV show. And that kind of got me thinking along the lines that, I'm not someone who likes looking at other comics to draw my comics. I'd rather, most people watch films, most people watch TV, we're all downloading things all the time. So I figured that's more of a vocabulary for people than your standard graphic novel comic illustration kind of thing. So I was like, let me see if I can adapt something like Narcos, adapt that style. So then I sat and I storyboarded the entire thing out again. And this time I redrew those 30 panels without telling my editors that, I'm trying this new thing. And we ended up with something that was pretty different. So I'm just going to show you the same panels. But I saw this, actually this one, when I saw that I was like, okay, this is it. This is what I want to do. And I got back to the editors, they loved it, they said go ahead. So that was the first thing I had out. Okay, so after this I thought, okay, I'm on to something. This is the kind of stuff I like doing. I went backwards and I ended up with a Batman script, which was kind of along the lines of what I wanted to draw. I'm not really keen on drawing superheroes, but it was a really dark, like the serial killer thing, and I thought this sounds like fun. And I ended up drawing some panels from that. So just to point out some things, it's so dark that even I don't know what's going on, but I was drawing it as I go. But the internet's an amazing thing, because I would put this up on Twitter and things like that, and I actually had someone from the Batman office at DC Comics write to me and say, your narrative is great, but your stuff's like really scratchy and it's so dark, we don't know how this would print. If you ever figure this out, we should be in touch, maybe something. A few months later, I did a few more pages. Oh, the other thing was, you've done a Batman script, you never do Batman once. It's just Commissioner Gordon talking to other cops, which sounded great to me, but yeah. So I did some, as you can see, it's a lot cleaner. I did a few more, I put in Batman over there. It was one of those things. They said, yeah, you drew Batman in the car, he's not really doing anything, he's just hanging out. Yes. So, I don't know, it's a work in progress, we're still in touch, maybe something. But I think the interesting thing was that the work was being seen, because I had a lot of emails suddenly from various publishers, and they were saying, it's interesting. One of those things wasn't a publisher, it was just this very random thing where there's this comic store in London called Gosh Comics, which is probably one of like the 5 huge comic stores in the world. And I was in London for a bit, I used to go to Gosh every day. And the guy behind the counter realized I was the guy who was on Twitter. And he sent me this email, and I remember telling him, other than the fact that you're not willing to pay me, this is the kind of email I wish I would get from people. So he had this weird experimental script where it was 15 pages of a person monologuing, and it's just one character and he's talking into an earpiece, and that's the entire thing. It doesn't really sound like much you could work with, but he was like, I think you've got good character acting and things going on for you, will you want to give it a shot? So I said, sure. So that's what we ended up with. I think from the early on I knew I wasn't going to be drawing the character everywhere, so I tried to focus on things like weird close-ups and architecture and getting the same character from different angles as I went. It was also fun to me because, as you can see where I said, I always thought I'd be drawing more people punching each other in comics. But it's not. Here's just this one guy sitting, talking to his cleaning robot, talking to his earpiece, talking to the plant. It's actually out later this year. It's a UK only release. But yeah, I mean, it should be on the internet eventually. So while this was going on, there was this thing that I heard about. It's called the C4C grant, which is the Creators for Creators grant. It's the mainstream comics version of, like, say, a Spielberg, George Lucas, or James Cameron putting together a grant for young, up-and-coming comic artists. But their bent is decidedly mainstream. So I kind of had this story that I thought, okay, I'm going to write and draw this myself. The story based in Calcutta, because all Bongs eventually do stories set in Calcutta. That was the cover to it. The grant involved my having to draw about 30 pages, like a finished 30 pages lettered and drawn, and then submit it along with a business plan and actual numbers and things like that. So
that's a damn good cover.
So yeah, so this was, since I was writing it myself, I didn't really write it, I just wrote random lines like this and went from there. This was the first page I drew. It was literally, I drew the entire thing from the ground up without knowing what the rest of my story was, and then filled in the rest. That's what my black and white page looks like. I like to put in the text so I know what I can draw around or how much space I have to play with in each panel. Something like this. I was visiting my parents in Calcutta. I got to do a lot of photo referencing, research, things like that. So this is what a black and white inked page looks like. You can see that over here I had a lot more people and a lot more cars and a lot of things going on, but finally I was like, screw this, I can't draw all of this. And I ended up simplifying it, but I think it moved a lot better finally. That's the colored page. So I think the interesting thing about doing something like this from completely by myself was that I got to do, like I said, I was all over the place in college doing courses and everything, so I got to play with typography and colors and things. I'm not one for naturalistic coloring, as you can see. It was interesting. I also started getting very much into since it was such a, they require like a lot of input on what you want to do finally with their money. So I was looking at production, I was looking at different papers, things like that. It was a pretty immersive, interesting experience. I didn't get the grant, but the good thing is it got the work. I was one of the shortlisted people. I think it was a shortlist of 8 or 10, and it put the work out there to like a much larger audience, and more people started writing to me with some pretty interesting projects. One of the guys who wrote to me was this guy called Aaron Stewart Ann, who's a brilliant filmmaker. He's a documentary filmmaker. He does music videos for bands like Death Cab and Iron and Wine and things like that. His next project is this, I guess the easy way to say it is it's a book about survivor's remorse, or people who've outlived their families or been in horrific incidents. He's Korean American himself. One of the stories he had was about this Korean immigrant who hasn't spoken to her family in 12 years because I guess she can't. There's no clear line of communication. She doesn't know if they're alive even at this point. So he sent me this brief description. He kind of described it to me as, if Wong Kar-wai made a ghost story, what do you think it would look like? So I sent him this back, and that kind of set the ball rolling on that. So that's the project I'm currently working on. These are some of the boards I've done for that. And the nice thing about working in the UK or the US market really is that unlike Indian comics, where it's still very much like this small niche thing, over there it's treated like this huge mass market kind of thing. So they want promo images, they want to do press. It's pretty cool actually. So this was the press image that I came up with, where the main character Yoonji is basically, she thinks she's haunted by her family because she thinks the TV is speaking to her. So every time she hears a voice and she's not she's not watching what's on the screen, she thinks she hears like her mother or like her father, things like that. So that was the image I came up with. That's the one that's doing the rounds now. Yeah, that's really it.